Devilman is a multimedia franchise that has built a reputation for its hyper-violent content and gory imagery. The original manga by Go Nagai is chock full of graphic violence and grim depictions of hatred that portray a very bleak picture of humanity as a whole. The world of Devilman seems to be stuck in an endless cycle of hatred and violence perpetuated by demons and humans alike. A cycle that is doomed to repeat itself over and over again. As it's apparent from its many adaptations over the decades, this aspect of Devilman's story never seems to lose its relevance. In this respect, Devilman Crybaby continues the already established tradition of the franchise. The anime adaptation by director Masaaki Yuasa does not shy away from showing violence, quite the opposite. The anime often revels in very exaggerated and stylistic displays of brutality and gore. Violence gets turned into a morbid spectacle that can be both disturbing and entertaining, albeit in a twisted way. But calling Devilman Crybaby a gratuitous gorefest wouldn't do it justice. In fact, it's a show that is very critical of violence, and above everything else, it presents an interesting critique of the forces and social structures that perpetuate its destructive cycle. In this video we'll explore Devilman Crybaby from this particular angle and see what we can take away from it. So, without further ado, let's dive into Crybaby's world.
金もない学もない先行きすら真っ暗いこの街に生まれ落ちた時点で未来なんてない光はあるのかそりゃどこかにはあるかもでも未だ迷子迷路どの道を行けど曲がり角割れた窓なく赤子の声が響くこのゲトマジヘドが出るぜ俺ら飛び出すその先へとだけど未だ抜け出すことできないまるで卵の殻に閉じ込められてるよな真っ暗闇
暗闇暗がりそこら中にジャンキーそらシラフじゃいられないし皆が疑心暗鬼あれも罠これも罠ならばまずは守らなきゃな自分の見えくらいは自分で愛騙し合いバカし合いデントライン殺し合いこんな終わり見えな負の連鎖から抜け出したいたとえどんな手段使ったって俺はこっから這い上がってみせる邪魔はどきな行くぜいつまた
Violence, selfishness and vice seem to be things that are inherently linked in Crybaby's narrative. Many of the side characters are shown to be violent individuals and slaves to their vices. Wrath, lust, pride, sloth, gluttony, greed, envy. All of the 7 deadly sins are embodied by humans and demons alike, and for the most part there doesn't seem to be much difference between the two groups. Humans are often shown to be just as vicious and merciless as demons, resorting to violence and deceit to fulfill their base desires. The only characters that are shown in an overwhelmingly positive light are Mickey and Akira before he turns into Devilman. Akira and Mickey never show any prejudice towards their peers, and they always try to resolve conflicts without resorting to violence, to the extent that they get ridiculed for it. They are the closest thing we have to a moral ideal in an otherwise irredeemable world. Two infinitely altruistic characters in contrast with a world where self-interest seems to be driving everyone else. Does this mean that Akira and Mickey are inherently good, while the rest of humanity is plain evil? Devilman's perspective on the issue doesn't seem to be quite as simplistic. A crucial element that shapes a person's morality and behavior is their environment, and this idea is very much present in Crybaby's narrative. Mickey and Akira grew up with loving and well-off families, while the other characters mostly come from low-income areas or ghettos, places where violence runs rampant and conflict is inevitable. In this kind of environment, the best way to survive is to suppress any unnecessary emotions that might cause additional suffering. Surviving means taking care of oneself above anyone else, because everybody else is ready to sacrifice others for their own benefit. Doubting everyone is the best form of defense, while showing empathy leaves an opening that can be easily exploited. The kind of universal love that Mickey and her family preach is a totally foreign concept to somebody that lives in an environment where violence is a daily occurrence. But at the same time, humans are inherently emotional and empathic to at least some degree, but they live in a system that requires of them to suppress these feelings and accept violence and selfishness instead. This contradiction is most explicitly explored through Akira's dual nature. Half human and half demon, he is torn between his empathy for all living beings and his mission to exterminate a seemingly endless army of demons that threaten humanity. Akira is stuck in a cycle of suffering that Ryo has created after turning him into Devilman.
殺したくてぶちのめしたくてたまらねえ。でも同時に悲しくて大声でわめきたくなる。赤ん坊みてえだ。人間はメンタルが弱い。感情で物を考えると合理的に答えが出なくなり、容量の限界を超えてしまう。そういう時、人間は忘れるんだ。人間には考えない能力も備わっている。酒、ギャンブル、女、そういうものを使って忘れようとする。人間の習慣だ。見習え。
Ryo's answer to Akira's dilemma is simply to forget. By giving in to his vices, Akira can ignore the pain for a time and continue his endless fight for survival, just like the regular humans that are stuck in their own battlegrounds. This vicious cycle continuously gets perpetuated by violence, and there doesn't seem to be any way out of it. Humans aren't born evil, but they will adapt to a system that perpetuates violence and deceit if that's the only way to avoid pain and survive. So far we've established that humans aren't inherently evil, but that their morals get shaped by their environment. What about demons then? If there's an embodiment of pure evil, it would surely have to be them. Ryo describes demons as creatures without conscience that lack the capacity to love, and for the most part they are shown to be absolutely merciless and horrible monsters. But there's one instance where Ryo's explanation doesn't quite add up. During Akira's fight with Sirene, Kaim willingly sacrifices his life to help her defeat Devilman, something that a demon who only looks out for himself would never do.
悪魔にも愛があるのか。まさか悪魔はある意味純粋な生物だ。破壊衝動、捕食活動が彼らの全てだ。そうか。俺には愛に見えた。
Are devils then not inherently self-serving and evil? Or have they, just like humans, had to develop these traits to live in a world where only the strongest could survive?
人間が誕生するはるか以前、この星を支配していたのは悪魔だった。弱さは死を意味し、強い者だけが生き残る力の歴史だ。
While the world that humans built isn't quite as brutal as the one that demons lived in, it's still a world dominated by those with power. Instead of physical strength, humans use money and weapons, and they perpetuate their power by forming isolationist groups. Gangs, nations, and other group identities divide people and make it easier to demonize the others, to make them seem less human. Isn't human history then, like the history of demons, built on violence as well? In a world where violence is rewarded, pacifists end up being frowned upon. Akira always tries to help others and protect them, and he can't help but empathize with everyone's pain. Most people see this as a sign of weakness. Someone like him can't possibly survive the harshness of the world, which is why Ryo turns him into Devilman, a powerful killing machine that can defeat any opponent. But even after being fused with a demon, Akira can't help but feel empathy for others, whether they are humans or demons. On the one hand, he feels the need to uphold his idea of justice and fight against evil, but on the other, it brings him pain to do so. Akira exemplifies the conflicting nature of humanity, the never-ending struggle between love and hate that keeps humans stuck in the vicious cycle. Ryo wants him to give in to his hatred to fight the demons, but he can still retain his humanity thanks to Miki, who is a constant reminder of the goodness that can be found in this morally ambiguous world. If Miki is the embodiment of good, then Ryo must be the embodiment of evil, right? He is, quite literally, Satan himself, the very definition of evil. He's the one that orchestrated the mass panic that turned humans against each other and unleashed an army of demons against them. Ryo pushes an already violent world to its logical extreme by instilling fear and distrust in everyone. Truly something that only someone without any feelings and compassion would do. But what if he's also a victim of the cycle of violence? As we find out from his backstory, Satan keeps being punished by God for challenging him. A God that he deems unmerciful, a God that keeps destroying everything he holds dear over and over again. Another cycle of death and destruction that keeps getting perpetuated by hatred and animosity. If even the creator of the universe seems to be perpetuating the cycle of violence, how is anyone supposed to stop it? Ryo's life has always been defined by violence. From his struggle against God to his time on the demon-infested earth, he was always surrounded by death and destruction. Even after reincarnating as a human, he was targeted right away for being different. Nobody has shown him love or compassion, so why should he bother showing it to them? The easiest way to live life is just to reject emotions altogether, since they are just a nuisance in a world of brutality. But then, amid all the fear, hate and violence, he met Akira.
大丈夫。怖くないよ。怖くない。怖くない。
Akira's love and empathy make him able to see people's true feelings, even if they are hidden beneath a cold facade.
どうして泣く？死ぬのは分かってた。弱い者は死ぬ。違う違う違う。りょうちゃんも泣いてる。なんで？俺は悲しくない。当然のことだ。りょうちゃんも泣いてる。
Nobody is truly without compassion. Everyone feels pain and sadness, and everybody can love. Even those that seem monstrous or evil have a heart. So maybe the way to break the cycle of violence is to appeal to love instead of giving in to hate.
すると、イエスに従事していた者の一人が剣を抜き、大祭司の下僕に襲いかかり、その耳を切り落とした。その時イエスは彼に言われた。剣を鞘に収めなさい。剣を抜く者は皆剣により滅びます。
それって戦っちゃダメってこと？
そうだ。互いが剣を合わせれば必ず犠牲が出る。
じゃあどうすればいいの？
愛だよ愛。
それ強いの？
強い強い。世界で一番強いんだから。
While human history has undeniably been one of conflict and violence, there have also been many attempts to change that through spirituality, religion, and pacifist movements, Christianity being one of these. Devilman Crybaby is full of very clear Christian symbolism, from the way God and angels are portrayed to its biblical depiction of the apocalypse. But the references to the Christian tradition are hardly just an aesthetic choice. Rejecting violence and embracing universal love are concepts that are at the core of Christian morality. If we look at Devilman through this lens, Akira becomes an almost Jesus-like figure, but instead of a semi-divine being like Christ, Akira is half-devil, which further reinforces the notion that love is universally present in everyone's nature. In episode 9, Akira uses his body to shield the victims of a witch hunt, and through his self-sacrifice he manages to appeal to the goodness in people's hearts and stops the violence. And this isn't an isolated instance. Martyrdom and self-sacrifice are recurring themes in Devilman Crybaby. Akira's parents sacrifice themselves to help Akira defeat Jinmen, Kaim sacrifices himself for Sirena, and Miko sacrifices herself to save Miki. As we know, martyrdom plays a big role in the history of Christianity, but self-sacrifice isn't a value that only Christians uphold. It's also shared by many other religions and traditions. In Devilman Crybaby, we can find another example of that in an emblematic scene that further reinforces the importance of self-sacrifice.
りょうちゃんほら、うさぎさん。そんなものはない。え？あれは月表面の高低差が陰影になってるだけだ。そもそも月には空気がない。じゃあ助けてあげなくちゃ。
アキラ、あの空にはウサギなんていない。俺はこの目で見てきたんだ。
This scene from episode 10 references the story of the rabbit on the moon, an old Japanese folktale that has its origins in the Buddhist tradition, and one that also praises altruism and self-sacrifice. One night, the man on the moon came down to earth disguised as a beggar. He chanced upon a fox, a monkey and a rabbit and asked for some food. The fox brought him fish from a stream, and the monkey brought him fruit from the trees, but the rabbit could only offer grass. So he threw himself onto the flames to offer himself to the man. Amazed by the rabbit's generosity, the beggar transformed back into the man on the moon and pulled the rabbit from the fire. To honor the rabbit's kindness, the man carried the rabbit back to the moon to live with him. What are we to make of this story in the context of Crybaby's narrative? All of the characters that uphold high ideals like altruism and compassion end up dying one by one in gruesome ways, and by the end even Akira seems to be fully consumed by his hatred for Satan. Nobody really gained any benefit from being altruistic, just death. Did everyone's sacrifice even achieve anything in the end? At the end of Devilman Crybaby, everything is lost. Both humans and demons are gone, the earth is destroyed, and even the moon is split in half. So did the sacrifices of Miki, Akira, and everyone else really achieve anything if this was the price to pay? The only one who survived is Satan, having once again lost everything he held dear to God's wrath. However, something seems to have changed in him this time.
あの時俺はお前が何を言ってるのかわからなかったよ。愛はない、愛などない、故に悲しみもない、そう思っていた。俺は今何かを感じているよ。これは何だ？
After realizing what he's lost, Ryo finally gives in to his feelings. The only person who's shown him love has been caught in the cycle of violence and is now gone. But although Akira may be dead, the love he has shown towards Ryo still remains. He has passed on his feelings along with everyone else's. Now it's up to Ryo to accept the baton and keep the love alive. As the old world ruled by violence gets destroyed and a new one is born, Ryo is the only one left to witness it. Will the cycle of violence repeat itself once more, or will this world be a more peaceful place? We don't know. But if Satan himself can learn to love, then maybe there is still hope for everyone else as well.